And so this year we have another wonderful peacemaker, and we also have someone, a good friend of hers, who's going to be introducing her before we actually pass out the award. So Patricia Arnett, if you'd like to tell us who we're going to be honoring.
I hope this is still coherent. I've been amazed and, just captivated by everything about Dear said, especially remembering.
A little louder.
Okay, is that good? Okay, so remembering Dan Berrigan and that history, I was always moved by that. My name's Patricia Hartnett. I'm a relatively new member of Pax Christi, and I have followed the movement through the years and been very moved by it. I'm an Irish Catholic who came to the U.S. as a small child, as did Therese. She from Palestine, I from Ireland, so we've had that commonality. I met her again at a Seville conference in 2012, and then became involved in peace and justice for Palestine with Therese's guidance, she being the person who was most prominent in my understanding at that time. Afterward, I had gone to the North Coast Coalition for Palestine meetings, which Therese and a number of others formed, and that was kind of an early effort on the part of advocacy for Palestine and the liberation of Palestine and the end of occupation. And what was interesting about that, and I'm not going to go on about this because it's too much, everything. Okay, well, Therese arrived at the second meeting with a photograph, school class picture, and she said, "Oh, look at this, that's you." So we were in the same class in the 6th grade at St. Amelia's School in San Francisco. And St. Amelia's is the patron saint of earthquakes. Yeah, just but she was a year younger, but her brother was in my class. Now about Therese Mughannam Walrath. Active as a strong voice for equal rights, local grassroots issues, against racism, and for peace and justice, at least for 30 years or more, over various organizations in Santa Rosa, Sonoma County, and other areas as well. First at the Peace and Justice Center in Santa Rosa and Sonoma County, and covering lots of local organization events, and later most prominently in Seville and Fosna. Some of those folks are here, which is wonderful to see, which is another introduction that was made for me by Therese. Very powerful group of people making a difference, and currently making a difference. At the beginning of her advocacy, as I understand, she centered her Palestine actions on interfaith communication and dialogue, mostly with the Jewish community, educating and speaking on the issues often with Jewish colleagues, and she developed personal relationships with many of the rabbis in the community and area. It couldn't have been easy. Now, in the wake of this current crisis and really the horror that we've been witnessing for the last over 100 days, there's been new urgency, and Therese has joined her forces with people that she's been working with over the years, with a great, strong group of Jewish Voice for Peace. And these are young people, lots of them, and we've had every Sunday a rally and a protest for ceasefire mainly, stopping the occupation, but for the ceasefire. And that has been invigorating. And at the end of it, we often have a circle and speak. Therese has often spoke, but many others as well. Sometimes an individual from Gaza. And many of the Jewish young people, mostly of them young, to me everyone's young, okay. So, no stranger to recognition and awards, She was Sonoma Peacemaker of the Year in 2010 and has been frequently cited for her activism and advocacy. 2 years ago, she was awarded the Inscription on the Wall of Peace in Sebastopol. I have been a friend and fellow Catholic. We have enjoyed many conversations about the church, our faith, sometimes heated, and often attended masses together. So I know that she is a prayer and a worker, recalling the direction, ora et labora, faith and works. That is Therese.
Okay, and Therese will be speaking to us in just a minute, but first we want to give her an award.
And a little token of our appreciation for the work you've been doing.
Thank you so much.
What I can do with this. So, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'll just say right off that I don't feel comfortable or worthy of this honor. I'm not saying that just to be humble, as I know that there are so many other more deserving unsung hero activists that I've met along the way. But I do accept this honor in the name of all those working tirelessly for justice in Palestine, some of whom are here today, several of people who are here today. And thank you, Patricia, wherever you are, and Vivian and Barbara, who nominated me, and thank you so much, Pax Christi, for this award. In honoring me, you honor Palestine and Palestinians. So I sincerely thank you. I also thank my family. Several are here today. My sisters, brothers-in-law here today who have always supported me in this work. Thank you to my dear friends Patricia and Louise, who's here, and so many others, all my Seville friends and friends from Santa Rosa. Thanks for making the trip to be here. I so appreciate you all so much. And of course, my husband David, who's here, and always the encourager, and our sons Matthew and Nicholas, and our grandsons, ages 4 and 6, Olin and Rowan, who are here, witnessing their grandmothers. They won't remember any of this, but they're here. So, Denise, you asked me to speak about my background, to speak about the peace work I've done in the past and what I'm doing now, and also the influence of faith on my work. Thank you, Denise. And that's what I will try to do. In doing the work that I do, I have always felt that I'm only doing what I'm supposed to do. Nothing extraordinary. I've had plenty of guides and models along the way, beginning with my father, whose name is Abraham, with all that name holds. Ibrahim in Arabic, with deep faith and trust in God, twice moving his family to the unknown for protection and a better life. My mother too, an earth mother who gave life to 13 children. Can you imagine that? I've had 2, that's enough. 11 of whom survived. My siblings are the best gifts our parents gave us, and several of them are here. My mother also lived a simple faith, trust, and service to her family and others all her life. Both my parents, well, they weren't saints, but devout they were. We as Christian Palestinians always considered ourselves direct descendants of the early Christians at the time of Jesus. My father's family and their ancestors claimed that they founded Ramallah in the 1550s, where they lived since that time until 1948. They lived there as a close-knit Christian tribe who were all somehow related. People are always asking me, oh, you know, so-and-so. It's like, I guess we're related, but I'm not sure how. My dad was a teacher who taught for the Patriarchate of Jerusalem. He was very well respected in the community. My mother, Jamile was her name, which means the beautiful one. And she truly was, not just in body, but in soul and heart. Her people came from an Aramaic-speaking Christian community in northern Iraq, Al-Qush, where the prophet Nahum is from. Her ancestors fled Iraq in the 1880s and ended up in Madaba, Jordan, another biblical town where she was born. I have often in my life felt my ancestors' rich blood surging in my veins and marveled at my lot and wondered from an early age what it all meant for me. So my family lived in Ramallah, but I was born in Jerusalem, just 6 or 7 miles away, without the checkpoints. I was born in a hospital at the Russian compound, which sadly has been turned into a prison by the Israeli government, a place where they hold and torture kids who throw stones. I've spoken with a young boy from East Jerusalem on one of my trips, whose brother was held there for 8 months in administrative detention. He told me that he knew firsthand about what torture his brother went through in that place. In 2011, when on a Sabeel trip, I went to the Russian compound because I wanted to see the place where I was born. So with my son Nicholas, who's back there, and his wife Irene, who couldn't be here, she's got school today, and my friend Joanne. Where are you, Joanne? There's Joanne. So the 4 of us, we went together. We walked the distance from the Mount of Olives, where we were staying, to the Russian compound in West Jerusalem. And it was with great difficulty and insistence that the 4 of us were finally able to get into the courtyard of that place. The security there, it was so scary, all the guns and rifles, but we insisted. They allowed us 5 minutes. And once inside, we sat on a cold stone bench in the courtyard where I prayed silently for the prisoners and their families, the rifled soldiers, all the people in those buildings. My heart was weeping when a soldier came to tell us our time was up. And we quietly stood up and left. And that was the place where I was born. So, back to 1948. I wasn't a year old yet when my family fled the war and massacres when Israel became a state. We found ourselves in Jordan, never again allowed to return to Palestine to live. For 10 years, we lived in Amman as poor refugees. My dad found a teaching job in a Catholic school, and eventually he became the principal of that school. I was 10 and a half when we came to San Francisco. And the only Catholic school in town that would take us all, my dad wanted us all to be together, was St. Emilius, which was over an hour away from where we lived. And we had to take 3 buses to get there. All 6, I think we were 7 going to the school. That was a very trying time for us, having to learn a new language and a new culture, and a strange new culture. And my parents told us not to tell people that we were Palestinian. This was 1958, when all sympathy in the U.S. was for the Jews in Israel. Well, we were in America, but my heart never disconnected from the memories of my childhood in Jordan and the stories of my family in Palestine. I remember feeling confused and often anxious as I tried to fit into my new world. When old enough to understand something of what happened to my family and so many others, I wondered how such injustice could be allowed to happen. I carried that question deep in my soul all through the next 2 decades of my life as I went to school, explored a spiritual path, got married, had children, and worked in a small family business. But all that I did never felt enough. There was something missing, and I didn't know what it was. In 1995, when Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by an Israeli militant, one of the local synagogues in Santa Rosa, where I lived, had a memorial service for him and needed a Palestinian to offer a prayer. They must have called the Peace and Justice Center to get my name, the token Palestinian of Sonoma County. I went, and they sat me with the bishop and Representative Lynn Woolsey, and I don't know who else, because what I remember most is that my knees were shaking. But I offered the prayer I had written. After the memorial service, several Jewish women surrounded me in the lobby, checking me out, and one of them asked me, and I quote, "Honey, are you sure you're Palestinian?" She wasn't joking. She wasn't joking. They'd never met a Palestinian before. I reassured her that I was Palestinian, born in Jerusalem, Palestine, as there was no Israel when I was born. Her eyebrows went up, but she was interested and asked if we could have lunch sometime. Well, we formed a Palestinian Jewish women's group, and I think one of my sisters back there was part of that group. And it was warm, and it was loving, and it was fun. They were just ordinary women, just like me and all the other women. I don't know how ordinary we were, but you know, just normal people. And we had a good time together, and that lasted until I thought it was time to speak about what happened to my family in 1948. And that was the last meeting we had, sadly. It became clear to me that I had work to do in my community in Santa Rosa. I remember somebody early on asked me if I was Pakistani, like from Pakistan, when I said that I was Palestinian. She'd never heard Palestinian. She thought I said Pakistani. It was shocking to me how little Americans knew about Palestine. So that's what I started to do. Through the next 10 to 15 years, I spoke about Palestine, its history, culture, conflict with Israel, and I used stories from my own family and the other Palestinians that I knew. We started another group, of Palestinians and Jews at that time and called it Becoming Allies. I was convinced at the time, as I still am today, that if there was a solution to the conflict in Palestine-Israel, it had to come from American Jews. Then, don't ask me how, but as Patricia mentioned briefly, I soon found myself speaking in synagogues, having lunch or coffee with individual rabbis, 5 of them from different synagogues in Santa Rosa and Petaluma. I was the item, I guess. But I was soon dropped, though, when they realized that as sweet as I can be, I still held my ground. They didn't like that. At the same time, I was speaking regularly at high schools, in churches, at the junior college and Sonoma State University, retirement homes. I went everywhere. I was invited Rotary clubs, and once I even spoke in a bar in Sonoma, Murphy's Bar. That was something else. I told the story of Palestinians in a simple, truthful way. I figured out that I can't be confrontive or threatening if I wanted people to hear me. I didn't get into debates. I'm just a simple person, I'm not a scholar or a historian, but I've read a lot and I know a lot. But I never got into debates. And didn't minimize the truth of what happened in Palestine and what continued to happen. Nor did I deny the history of suffering of the Jewish people. But, I explained, it was suffering at the hands of Christian Europeans. Not Muslims, not Palestinians. Most people I spoke to were open, surprised, and sympathetic. What I told them also disturbed them, which was good. But they could hardly believe what I was saying. Of course, I prayed each time I made a presentation that the Holy Spirit would use me to reach people on this issue. Often I felt I was doing the work God wanted me to do. Usually, I would ask David, my husband, to give me a blessing before I went out the door, with my bag full of handouts and a large map. And he did give me a blessing each time. It was exhausting but deeply satisfying work. In 2006, I joined NorCal Sabeel, a Christian Palestinian organization founded in Jerusalem by Palestinians. And I attended my first Sabeel conference in Minnesota the following year. I soon became part of the team to this day, and I love my Sabeel friends here in NorCal Sabeel. I was amazed at the quality and dedication of these Americans, many of whom are here today. These were passionate people who knew so much about my country of origin and who were so committed to working for justice in Palestine. I traveled with Sabeel members to Palestine twice. One of the trips was led by Hassan Fouda, who is here today. The trips were about learning, witnessing to what was happening in occupied Palestine. Things that in those days didn't get much attention in our media. Things such as, I call it the obscene 26-foot-high concrete apartheid wall you see. Some of you may have been there and may have seen it, right? How many of you have? Oh wow, quite a few. Well, you see that as soon as you get into Jerusalem from Jordan. Running arbitrarily along the West Bank, snaking in to steal precious water sources and arable land, and things like checkpoints that disrupted the daily lives of people, demolished homes, the constant presence of armed Israeli military in the West Bank, and more and more stolen Palestinian land on which illegal Israeli settlement towns were built for Jews only. And all of that. We saw all of that. Hassan took us all around, and it was quite devastating. I took pictures of what I saw, which I included in my presentations to show people in America what our country was doing with our tax dollars in aid for Israel. We also listened to many Palestinians on these trips, many who were struggling every day just to stay alive. I'm not exaggerating. We went to Israel too and met with human rights organizations and Israeli activists. My eyes opened wide. In 2010, if you remember, the flotillas, do you remember the flotillas? On their way to Gaza with medical and humanitarian supplies, and how they were attacked by the Israeli military. Well, a group of us in Santa Rosa organized ourselves and founded the North Coast Coalition for Palestine that was briefly mentioned by Patricia. We basically tried to educate our community. Nothing huge, just basic stuff about Palestine. We had prominent speakers. We were really lucky, such as Omar Barouti. He's famous. I mean, he wrote the BDS book, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. He was giving another talk somewhere, and we had him come to our place and talk to us. It was amazing. We showed films and had cultural events. Once we had a live play about Rachel Corrie. Wow, that was so powerful. We had a real actress doing Rachel Corrie's part. It was very powerful. Anyway, we had protests and marches and so on through the years. I personally tried also to get involved with other groups or movements to show my support. If we wanted others to support us in our work for justice in Palestine, we have to be present at their events. It's just basic, right? Events such as Occupy, Black Lives Matter, immigration rights, police brutality, and there's just so many other things that were going on. I'm really lucky to live in Santa Rosa in many ways. Even though it's small, there's a really powerful, very conscious and passionate group of people who are working for justice for everyone. Some in our group are also involved with the unhoused people in our community. And it wasn't difficult to see that all of these groups were resisting the same thing. And it was the oppression of the powerless by those in power, economically or politically, and even religiously. In being present with supporters of others' issues, we created allies in our work for Palestine. For the last 6.5 years, I and 3 others, one of whom is Jewish, have been producing a radio show called Speaking of Palestine. It's an hour weekly show that is basically educational again, and is heard on KBBF-FM, a community bilingual station which broadcasts to 18 counties in our region. So we feel proud of ourselves. It's quite an achievement. And we're all volunteers, basically. We've interviewed amazing people like Dr. Mazen Khomsiya from Bethlehem, or Don Wagner, oh my goodness, you must know him too, an expert on Christian Zionism, or Joe Bainin from Stanford University, and so many others. It's been 6.5 years that we've been doing this. In the show, we always include updates from Palestine and around the world about Palestine. Always we have Arabic music and often poetry, especially from the poets of Gaza. Since October 7th, as with so many groups, We've gone full throttle. Many people have joined all our actions for Gaza, including many young Jewish women and men who found us and threw in their lot with us. It's wonderful. Also many Muslims, some of whom have become really close friends. It is a wonder to see how we have gelled together in our outrage and grief over what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank. We call ourselves Sonoma County for Palestine. We stand together in protest every Sunday, and usually about 100 or so people show up. We've organized ourselves in teams to urge towns and cities in our county to sign on ceasefire resolutions. We've only been successful once so far in Katati. And we've had Zoom meetings with congressional representatives, written letters to our newspapers, and all the things that you all probably are involved with, phone calls, and all kinds of other actions to stop the bombing in Gaza. We've gone through malls, picketing different places that support Israel, and it's actually really quite fun to be doing that. I've personally reached out to our bishop and some priests in our diocese without any success. I have to admit that I'm angry and deeply disappointed at the silence and hypocrisy in our church. But I haven't given up yet, and I do thank God for Pope Francis, who does speak out pretty regularly against the violence on both sides. Almost done here. I was struck by the gospel reading a few days ago at the Mass for the conversion of St. Paul. On his way to round up the Christians in Damascus for persecution, he was blinded by a light, as you remember the story, and heard a voice saying to him, "Why are you persecuting me?" And Paul asked, "Who are you?" And the voice said, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." God identifies with the poor and oppressed. Think about most of the people Jesus ministered to, the rejected, the voiceless, the poor. That's our work too, if we say we want to live the gospel values. And what Father John Deere did this morning was just so eloquent, and I really want to take it to heart and work with that material with others. Finally, in Gaza, as of last night and since October 7th, 26,083 Palestinians have been killed, including 10,400 children. Children, like my grandkids back there. 64,487 are injured. In the West Bank too, where my brother and his wife live, 371 people have been killed by the military and settlers, and 6,255 people in the West Bank have been detained. These are not just numbers. Just imagine all the sorrow and the pain felt by the families of these individuals. I believe that God must be crying too over the suffering. Suffering is suffering, and yes, people are suffering on the other side as well. But you'll have to admit that the disproportionality is staggering. And the bombing and displacement of families continues as I speak. How can this not be a genocide or ethnic cleansing? I'll end with a very short poem by Mus'ab Abu Toha, who is a poet from Gaza, and luckily for the world, he survived. So here's the poem. It's very short, and I'll read it once. Don't ever be surprised to see a rose shoulder up among the ruins of the house. This is how we survived. Again, don't ever be surprised to see a rose shoulder up among the ruins of the house. This is how we survived. That speaks of hope and resilience to me. Thank you.